welcome everybody to Getting Back to Work Chamber Live. Thank you all for coming today, and obviously to our guest speakers as well. I'd first of all like to start by thanking our patrons, because obviously without their support we wouldn't be able to obviously do all the lobbying on behalf of all of our members. So I want to say thank you to Marjohn's, City College, Princess Yachts, GWR, Thomas Westcott, Plymouth University, Plymouth City Bus, Devon County Council, and a new one of Babcock as well. So we're really pleased, obviously they're all on board and obviously helping us with all of that as well. For the format of the event today, we've got 5 guest speakers, so really pleased to have them all in today. So we've got Rob Perks, who's the Executive Chairman of Inspire. Rob will be considering how to create a strategy that fits in the new world of work and getting the best out of the teams in a hybrid environment, obviously, which is quite obviously from what we're going through today and what we're coming out of now. Also got Ian Grimshaw, partner of Nash & Co Solicitors, and Ian will be advising the employer considerations and obligations we might need to be aware of, so quite important to obviously be aware of those. Helena White, Director of the HR Department. Helena will be discussing how to manage the health and mental well-being of all our employees as we adjust to our new working way of, well, new life working way. So I think that'll be really important, obviously, as we all start to maybe half get back into the office and half not, so maybe not going back into the office. So there's going to be quite a mixture there, so obviously to deal with that. Simon Taylor, who's the Employment Engagement and Placement Officer at Plymouth University. And Simon will be discussing a number of fantastic placements and internship opportunities across the university, as well as highlight the opportunities across the support as well. Also Chris Holly, ex-solicitor at Womble Bond Dickinson. Chris will be looking at the physical issues and ensuring the workplace is ready and safe for the employees to return back to work, including home workspace as well, because like I said, obviously it will be a lot of half and half, I think, moving forward. Also as well, I'd like to introduce shortly as well, obviously the Joe Osgood, who's from Smart Skills, from CWS Group, who is actually the who's a sponsor of the event. Sorry, I couldn't find that word. Stuart's given me a few little things to just round up really of what we've been up to and what we've been doing as the chamber. So we obviously had the finance fair last week, which was a massive success. So I'd like to thank all the team for their hard work for that. We had 343 viewers on LinkedIn and 320 on Facebook as well. And obviously it's still being seen this week as well, because people can still stream that as well. Sponsorship for the golf day as well, so obviously that's going to be our first in-person event in June, so really excited about that. There's still teams available, so if anybody would like to have any more information about that, then obviously just pop that in the chat and Jasmine and Olivia will pick that up. And also there's still 7 holes for sponsors as well, and we've got obviously the awards coming up as well, which obviously you can sponsor, and really excited. Obviously we booked Buckfast Abbey for that as well, so hopefully we'll all be there and enjoying a drink together, which would be really nice. There's still got the conversation with podcast, obviously with Stuart as well. So there's still every week, obviously, a new one of that's coming up. So I'm sure Jasmine or Olivia will pop that into the chat so you can catch up with any of the podcasts that you've missed with Stuart. We've also been asked by the LEP to run another 2 cohorts of peer-to-peer network and seeking business people that wish to take part. So again, if anybody's interested in that, then obviously please do let us know. And again, we'll put that in the chat for you as well. These have been really well received, and obviously have had great feedback as well. So it's great to get involved with that. The prospectus for the bids to become the trailblazer for the local skills improvement plan following the FE white paper, and we'll be pulling the Devon bid together obviously very shortly as well, so all exciting things coming up. So I'll just hand you over now to Joe Osgood, as I said, who is sponsoring the event. So she's just going to have a quick minute to introduce herself and what she does.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sam. Thanks for that. So yeah, it's great to be sponsoring the event, and And yeah, good luck with everything as it progresses, which is great. Yeah, I'm the partnership and engagement manager for the Smart Skills program. It's an ESF program, if you haven't noticed. It's a £3.5 million project running between now and 2023. And the aim is to support 3,000 people. And the core aim, we're running a Smart Skills Hub, which you'll see there. And that's to support mainly small and medium enterprises. So that's companies with 250 staff or less to upskill their staff. It's a Devon program that includes Plymouth and Torbay. And we're working with our Smart Skills partners, which are Petrox, South Devon College, City College Plymouth, Learn Devon, Focus Training and the University of Exeter. The offer ranges from composite technology, leadership and management, food business, and it's demand-led. So there's lots of opportunity. And I think getting on with today's theme as well, there's an element in response to COVID to support nearly 1,000 people who are unemployed as well. So the eligibility is you need to be over 16, either employed or unemployed, and looking to upskill. And I know that Jasmine's going to share the link to the Smart Skills Hub later on. So that's us in a nutshell.
Lovely. Thank you ever so much. Thank you. Just a quick mention as well, we are recording the event. So if there was anybody that obviously didn't want to be recorded, obviously just turn your video off. It's just so that we can share it afterwards, obviously, so everybody can hear obviously what our guest speakers have to say. And also we'll do a question and answer at the end as well. So if you do have any questions, then just pop them in the chat and obviously we can go through them at the end as well. So I'd like to hand over to our first speaker for today. So Rob Perks, if you want to jump in.
Thank you, Sam. Good morning, everybody. I think, yes, thank you. The technology is working brilliantly. That's because I'm not operating it, which is fantastic. Thank you, Jasmine. We were just discussing before we came on, we're going to sound a little bit like the daily briefing as we got used to it, with Jonathan Van Tam saying, next slide, please. So just prepare yourself for that. There are no Union Jacks and there are no press involved, so that's good. So I just want to talk just for a few minutes. Obviously, this is just a real brief overview. And I want to say at the outset, a lot of the work we do is part funded by the Hertford South West Local Enterprise Partnership. So there's quite a lot of free resources available through us to flesh this out more if you're interested in going into it in a bit more depth. You can do that without having to pay, which is always good. So most important thing, I think, as we come out of the pandemic, we've been in for an interesting year or so. And I think as we look at the economy now, we can see a lot more bright sunshine on the horizon, not to quote Boris Johnson. I think things are looking much better, genuinely. And, with the 150, 200 billion of savings that consumers have built up over the last 12 months or so, a good section of that, I think, is going to make its way into the economy over the next few months. So we are expecting quite a bounce back as we get into sort of May and June. And I think it's starting already. People are showing their desire to get out and do things and spend some money. So we are expecting the economy to bounce. And the most important thing for us as businesses is to make sure we're ready for that. We've been talking about this now for 6 months. Because it does take some preparation, but there's a great opportunity to be ready to benefit as the economy reopens and consumers start spending again. So the most important thing is to have a clear strategy and to have a strategy which is relevant. So the first slide, we're just going up very briefly at some of the key things about defending and protecting what we've got. So we do need to reassess everything. That's our view. This may be quite a short process. You may do a really honest reassessment of your business and think everything is absolutely spot on for the new world as we come out of the pandemic, and you don't need to make any changes at all, and that is fine. Equally, if you're really honest with yourself, you may find that your customers have started to do other things. So, is what we do still just as relevant as it was 14 months ago? So the obvious thing is the high street. It is going to change. People have moved online. So if we're just still relying on everybody trooping through our front door every day, is that still a viable proposition going forward? So is it still relevant? You can probably just flick these little bullets on now, Jasmine, if that's okay. Have our customers' behaviours and preferences, priorities, needs, situations changed? We all know that customers' behaviours and preferences have definitely changed. You know, people are switching more online. They're trying to avoid face-to-face contact, and I think even if the roadmap comes up to pass and we exit all the measures on the 21st of June, people won't just snap back to how they were 18 months ago. People will still be taking their own particular precautions and doing things in different ways. Will people be happy on crowded buses and trains, for example? So we've got to really think, how might our consumers, our customers have changed, and how might they want to access our services differently from the way they did before? Do they still want our service at exactly the same level as they did before, or will they want it at a different level, maybe more, maybe less? And do we still want to interact with them in exactly the same way? So do we actually want to go back to how we were 18 months ago? Or are we going to interact in a different way? Might there be more online? Might there be more automated discussion? And that kind of thing. Could be a whole range of things, but just asking those questions, having a really good look at ourselves. That's the first thing, I think. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is probably the one there's only a few slides, and I'm going to dwell on this one perhaps more than any others. So this is an opportunity to look forward. So if we've defended and protected what we've got, or maybe even dropped certain things if they're no longer relevant, what are the opportunities? Now, how this little graph works is probably fairly obvious. I hope it is. So in the bottom left-hand corner of the graph there, you've got what's the easiest thing to do, which is keep your existing clients in your markets and keep your existing products or services. So obviously that is the easiest thing to do. Is that still all you want to do? It might be, but equally it might well not be. So opportunities we can look for. So the second easiest thing to do is to keep our existing products or our existing services, and then move up the left-hand side of that graph to find new clients or new markets. So as our product or service become attractive to a new group of customers that we didn't have before, could we go and sell that product or service to a new group, an additional group of customers? And then moving along the bottom axis, what we can do there is keep our existing clients, actually sell them more things. So could there be new services and new products that our clients want that we could develop and sell to them? Certainly something we've done as an organization over the last few months has been looking at, at the clients that we've got, what new services are relevant and what do they need. We've found, for example, lots of small to medium-sized businesses are doing this exercise, but they need to raise money to do it. So they need to get some more capital into the business to be able to launch new products and services, or to grow their teams, or whatever it might be. So it's very often a big issue. How am I going to fund this activity? So we developed Inspire Investment, which is looking at how we can help people get investment into their businesses, as an example. Another one will be getting some seriously experienced people to mentor me and give me the benefit of their experience of growing businesses of their own. How do I access those people? How do I find them? So we brought out several new services that are now relevant, that were less relevant 12 months ago. And I'm sure you'll all be thinking, maybe there's things that you could do like that. And then finally on this one, in the top right-hand corner, you've got finding new clients and launching new services for those clients. That's the hardest thing to do, because you've obviously got to find the clients and you've got to develop a new product or service. Nevertheless, there may be opportunities to actually do that. So we found, for example, a lot of our clients have moved from B2B to B2C. We've got one client that used to sell a lot into the retail shops across the country in a food product. And he found that business dropped through the floor during the pandemic, but he was able to do online sales, and he increased his online sales by even more than the business he lost by selling into shops. So just finding a different distribution channel can be one thing. Maybe switching to a digital or remote service. Over the last 12 months, all our services have been delivered digitally because we haven't been able to meet people. So that's another thing, or creating a completely fresh product to meet the needs of your customer. So that it's just a little thing you can have. I'm sure the slides will be distributed afterwards. You might find that helpful. We do run a free workshop which can look at that in a lot more detail and help flesh that out. If you're interested in doing that, we can pick up separately. Next slide, please, Jasmine. So this is really, really important in my view. So what we often do, I think, all of us, is we can think, what services could I develop, or how do I need to change what I'm doing to fit with the staff I've got? And we're doing it the wrong way around, really. It should be the other way around. So we decide what we need to do as a business and then see how our people fit. So working out, first of all, what we want to do, then deciding what skills do we need to deliver that, and then finally looking at how that fits with our existing team. And it may be that some of the team fit nicely into that plan, some of the team don't. But if we don't address that problem, then we'll end up hindering the progress of our businesses. So the whole issue of home working, which I know Helena, I think, is going to cover in more detail. So I'm going to move through this bit quite quickly. But, you know, everybody's had to work from home over the last 12 months, but in a lot of cases, it's less than ideal. So is home working the right situation for the business that you operate in and the way you want to deliver your products and services to your customers? It might be. It could well be in a lot of cases, but in a lot of cases it won't be. And we shouldn't end up just doing home working because it's become a thing, rather than it's the right thing for our business. So hard questions about home working, I think. If you flick to the next slide, please, Jasmine, I'll just go through this next one quite quickly because I don't want to steal Helena's thunder. Can you get to the next slide? Is that happening? There we go. So these are just questions, and I'm sure Helena will tackle these much more, but all I want to say about this one, it is important to think about how our people are at the moment. You know, how have they come out of this? I know a business we run as a family, a lot of people are coming out quite psychologically troubled as a result of the last 12 or 14 months. And if we don't address that, then we're going to struggle to get them fully motivated and driving forward. So I'll leave that one at that for now, I think, and just move on to the next one, please, Jasmine, if you can. So this is really important. I think once we've decided what we want to do and what products and services we want to deliver, the next thing is then making sure everybody knows what the plan is and that we've got clear targets in place for people so that they're all clear what they're supposed to be doing and when they're supposed to do it and what should be delivered. We needed a performance culture. It's all been quite ragged, I think, for a lot of us over the last 12 months. But if people aren't clear what they've got to deliver, they're going to struggle to get things done. I think one just comment I'd leave you with on home working, having managed lots and lots of people over many years working from home, do not be misled by commentators who say everybody is more productive when they work from home. It's a falsehood. Some people are, and some people are not. And if we ignore that, we ignore it at our peril. Some people will be very focused when they work from home. They've got a good setup. They've not got any distractions. They're self-motivated, and they would turn out a lot of work working from home. Others will easily get distracted by lots of other things and will be very underproductive working from home. And that's something that is a person-by-person assessment that you've got to look at with your team. So supporting them, but at the same time recognizing not everyone is going to deliver what you need them to do working from home. And that's something we've got to address in the coming weeks. Okay, I think we're almost there now. Yes, we are indeed. So hopefully I was roughly on time. And say, if you want to follow up any of that, there's lots of free support and help available to go into that in more depth. But thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand back to Sam, I guess, now.
Lovely. Thank you ever so much for that. It's lots of things to think about in there, and I can completely understand where you're coming from in regards to the difference in each person separately, you know, and obviously managing their expectations separately as well. I know Helen obviously likes to work from home and obviously relishes the quietness and, you know, and gets on, whereas I do like quite, you know, a bit of noise around me and my colleagues around me, and I do sort of, there's perks to both, but I must admit I am very much looking forward to getting into the office. But there will be some companies that will close their offices, you know, and there won't be that option to go back back in. So obviously they'll need to be, obviously spoken to and managed at the staff as well. So thank you for that. So our next speaker is Ian Grimshaw, partner at Nash & Co Solicitors.
Hello. I'm doing back to work, a bit of home working, a bit of the benefits, and some of the things I think we've realised as time has gone by. So if we, I can't say go to the next slide. I'm going to have to come up with a different word. If we can go to the next thing, working from home. When we all started working from home when the COVID-19 pandemic started, I'm pretty certain the entire country had the same view as a small child. It was exciting. All of a sudden, telephone calls became a thing of the past, and instead we all got to do video calls. At the time we did video calls, we all had haircuts, and we all looked nice, and it was good. By June, none of us had haircuts, and we still had to do video calls. And then you end up with marvellous mains like this one. I have a haircut on Saturday at 9 AM. I'm very much looking forward to it, and then I can start doing video calls again. So I thought I'd look at what we all initially thought when this all kicked off. Lots of us had avoided home working. Lots of people thought people would become unproductive. And come March, April last year, we really started seeing the benefits. So one of the first things we saw as people started working effectively was future. We started thinking, actually, our overheads, we can grow without actually increasing our office space, therefore giving opportunities down here to actually grow our businesses without increasing the overheads in terms of office space. Very exciting. We also found that people were having to travel less. So their productivity was increasing, people were less tired, they're having more of their own home time. So the time they're actually working at home was actually, we find, much more productive than they were finding in the office. The staff were more motivated, they felt trusted. We also found, in terms of skills retention, where we had staff who otherwise would have left because, for example, their family's relocating or they have family responsibilities, because of the flexibility around home working, we're able to retain those skills. One of the issues that we found in West Devon especially was recruitment. And in terms of flexibility, being able to offer a successful home working environment has enabled us to actually spread our net wider. And then finally, for when winter finally comes, disruption avoidance. We've all had that joy of snow coming, a splattering of snow, and all of a sudden everybody has to stay at home and get their sledges out. And so essentially we're able to plan for the future. Now that, I think, was how everybody back in April, May, June time last year was feeling. But I think one of the things to be borne in mind when we look at that initial first blush of home working was that there was also a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear from people that actually, where is my business going to go? Where is my employer going to go? And that actually encouraged a lot of the motivation. And what a lot of my clients are now finding is, now that initial concern has moved on, all of those great, bright, exciting hopes for home working are beginning to fade. And I think it's important for all businesses to be thinking, actually, are there negatives to this as well? And one of the big ones is a loss of control. Insofar as there's a damage to the team, there's a damage to team culture, and there's a loss of support. Insofar as at the moment, if you're in the office, you can go and you can see the person next to you, you can ask immediate questions, you can overhear people, you learn by osmosis. Whereas working remotely, booking in a Teams call at 9:30 every Wednesday isn't going to give you that same team feeling. It isn't actually going to create an ethos of the business. And a lot of businesses that we've come across are not being able to say tangibly that this is what's happening, but especially when they have junior staff, what they're finding is, where are they learning? How are they learning? Because sitting in a silo on your own isn't going to help you learn in a natural way. Dependency on technology, of course. We talked about earlier about snow days. Love a snow day. It's a shame in Plymouth we don't get as many snow days as you do in Bristol. But we've got dependency on technology. I got a text message from Virgin 2 days ago saying, terribly sorry, but your internet's going to be down for 2 days. I couldn't work from home for the next 2 days. And if actually you've become too dependent on it, we'll find ourselves in that situation across the board. And then the horrible one to say, I'm terribly sorry to say it, but lazy staff. Not being able to manage people directly, not being able to see what people are doing, enables people to catch up on Columbo. Columbo's great, but it actually lasts 2 hours when you actually think it's going to take 45 minutes. But you can't leave it. And your staff, when they aren't being monitored, those who are committed will carry on working. Those, especially if you don't have an output monitoring, can become very lazy. So if we are going to input home working on a longer term basis, we need to make sure we actually do have some form of monitoring to ensure that people are genuinely working effectively rather than being, at best, busy fools. And really, the one which I think is going to start kicking off probably next year are data security breaches. A lot of people aren't set up for working at home. But they are taking home information which is either personal data of customers, client confidential information, or business confidential information. And they're leaving it on their dining room table, which has been fine for the last year because nobody's been allowed in your house. However, as things move forward and you have friends over, how are we going to make sure that those data breaches don't happen? So who has access to the employee's computer? Are we ensuring that we are purchasing laptops for people to use at home? Are we ensuring those laptops are encrypted so that in the event that it's stolen in a burglary, even if someone's got the password, they can't actually get past the initial encryption? Where are paper files being kept? Have staff got filing cabinets at home to keep them in? Or are they being turned over when friends come over? And how are papers being destroyed? So in my office, for example, we have a big truck which comes over once a week and shreds everything on the premises. Is confidential information being put in domestic waste? And is that going to be a massive issue for you in the future? We've all had a lot of flexibility. We've all had a lot of disruption, but we do really need to think about, if we are going to make this long term, how we're going to make it work. So, despite my negativity, some may wish for this to continue longer term. I'm quite negative about it, I think, because I'm someone who really hates working from home. I thoroughly enjoy actually leaving the house every day and walking through the Barbican and then getting to the office. But if we're going to, we need to be looking at actually how we're going to manage it from a contractual perspective. So place of work, are we going to be having in their contract a requirement they're coming to the office for meetings so they don't have a contractual entitlement to remain at home? Their hours of work, are we actually going to increase this flexibility? Or are we going to have 9 till 5? If we're going to have flexibility, are we going to have core hours to make sure that people are able to get in touch with each other at specific times? Salary and benefits, especially if you have flexible benefits, such as gym membership, canteen benefits, etc. How are we going to ensure that actually people aren't excluded from those? Expenses, what are we going to be covering? Are we going to be covering costs to and from the office? Or are we simply going to be saying that's a cost you have to bear? Let's make it clear from the outset. Holiday, of course, everybody gets the same holiday. Illness. It's very easy if you're home working, especially if you are on a measured output basis, to be sick, to not do anything, and no one will know. If you aren't monitoring sickness absence, then actually you're going to have a real problem in the future because it'll be too late. So having a clear policy that's illness still needs to be reported in the same way. Confidentiality, we covered earlier. Monitoring. Now, one of the best ways we can monitor productivity where there's not a measurable output is going to be by way of internet and email monitoring. Are we going to have policies in place allowing us to look at what people are actually doing on their computers? Are they actively working? And we can't simply do that because we feel like it. We have to have a policy in place enabling us to do so. Disciplinary grievance procedures. Should we be updating those? Not in the contract, because we never have contractual disciplinary and grievance procedures, obviously. Are we going to be updating those to ensure that people aren't doing household chores, they aren't looking after children? So being clear that actually abusing the home working environment is a disciplinary issue. A right to enter the home. All our equipment's in their home. All of our confidential information's in their home, but it's their home. They have a right to their privacy. Are we going to have a right to enter their home in order to gather our property? My suggestion would be, darn right, yes, we should. And then finally, a right to revert. Everything's going well at the moment, but it might not be going so well in the future. We want in our contract a right to revert. Therefore, we can pull people back into the office if needs be. Not having that is going to be a real problem. Now, people might be saying already at this stage, well, I've worked at home now for over a year. I've got an implied right to work at home. My take on that is no, you don't. You have an implied right to work at home during the pandemic when the government tells you to work from home. You don't have an implied right to work from home forever and a day. However, if we allow this to continue, even with a contractual entitlement to revert, we could still find ourselves with sex discrimination claims, for example, in terms of people needing flexibility for childcare, if we revert to office working without good reason. So if we allow this to continue past the current crisis, we need to be careful because it's not going to be as simple as simply calling people back into the office. You're going to be able to demonstrate why it's not working for that individual. Now, the other thing which was mentioned very briefly was the idea that people are going to go into Pimlico Plumbers very quickly in a minute, is the idea of people shutting their offices. Where people shut their offices, it's a fundamental change to their terms and conditions. And you could be considered to be a dismissal. And in those situations, don't simply think of it as, I'm telling you, you all now have to work from home. Some people might like it, some people might hate it. Think carefully because something called collective consultation might come into place, which basically involves electing representatives. And if you don't do it properly, you can find yourself with a 3-month pay award for every member of staff. So if you're thinking of changing an office, especially if you have 20 or more staff, take some legal advice, not necessarily from me, but whoever you fancy, because it could have quite catastrophic implications. Now, I'm going to very quickly cover Pimlico Plumbers with no jab, no job. Charlie at Pimlico Plumbers is someone who is always, I would think, at the head of the curb on headline grabbing policies. When his staff were found to be workers, he thought that was terribly unfair because they were very well paid. Not quite understanding the test of being a worker in terms of being paid. But 23% of employers think that vaccinations should be mandatory for all staff, and 49% of recruiters have said that they would prioritise applicants who had had a vaccination. So, can I force myself to have a vaccination? The starting point from my perspective, can I have a next slide? Thank you. Starting point from my perspective is that no, existing staff, you can't force to have a vaccination. You haven't got a contractual right to force somebody to have a vaccination. You haven't got a contractual right to essentially invade somebody else's body. Vaccination isn't suitable for everybody. It requires their consent, and mandating vaccination, I think, is going to be very difficult. The most obvious place where I think mandating vaccination might be possible when it's available for everybody is likely to be in the care industry. But there are lots of questions around it still. Insofar as we know that vaccinations protect people, but the whole purpose protect people from the virus themselves. But mandating vaccinations is about protecting in care homes the vulnerable. And at the moment, we don't have the evidence to suggest that vaccinations prevent transmission. Evidence is coming, but it isn't here yet. And therefore, if we are enforcing vaccinations on the basis that it protects the vulnerable, we need the evidence to back it up. And I think at the moment, businesses which are going in on that approach are on a bit of a sticky wicket because they haven't got the evidence to suggest that that is something which is justifiable. So we can't mandate vaccinations for our existing staff, but what about applicants? They haven't got a contract and they've got no rights towards me at the moment. So why don't I just say all new staff have to be vaccinated? Seems like a nice workaround. The reason that it's going to cause difficulties is discrimination law. So we actually managed to hit most of the protected characteristics with a compulsory vaccination policy. Is pretty successful in that regard. So we've got discrimination on the grounds of age. Most people under the age of 50 still haven't had a vaccination, and therefore you're going to be discriminating against younger people. Disability, those who have immunosuppressed immune systems are unable to have the vaccine. So a compulsory vaccination program is going to discriminate against those with disabilities. Discriminating against on the grounds of pregnancy. Women who are pregnant currently aren't allowed to have the vaccine because there isn't sufficient evidence of its efficacy, and therefore discriminating against those who are pregnant. Sex, we really are hitting all of the protected characteristics. Women might be wishing to become pregnant in the future and therefore are being advised not to have the vaccine. Race, if we look at race, vaccine take-up within Black and minority ethnic communities is way below that in white communities. So we'd be discriminating against on the grounds of race. And finally, religion. Some vaccines are tested on essentially pre-embryos, which is against numerous religions and belief, which prevents people from taking the vaccine. So there are lots of issues involved with no jab, no job, and there's a huge amount of publicity around it at the moment, especially with pub passports, as I'm going to take to calling them. But before you start looking at implementing, think of the potential risks which follow them. So what can you do? What can you do? It's always very good to go in a Braveheart way and say things must be done. The reality is that a voluntary program is much better. You can help your staff help you by educating them. There's a lot of educational materials available from Gov.uk in terms of the benefits of vaccines and the lack of risk in the vaccines, especially the current ones. They are quite astounding in their low level of risk. And therefore actually educating staff with posters, meeting them, talking to them about it is going to be much more effective and opening up to much less risk. In addition, you could offer a paid time off policy for taking vaccines. So people aren't having to book appointments outside of work time and are getting a benefit to a certain extent of having the vaccine. So think about ways you can encourage gently people to take a vaccine rather than going all out and saying it has to be something which is done. And that, I think, gets me in my 15 minutes and I'm done. So thank you ever so much.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ian. Just a quick one. Well, sorry, you were going through that really. So is there a specific date to say, right, you can now return back to the office, or has that already happened? Or
No.
As in not the employer's choice, but as in overall?
We're looking at the 22nd of June. Is the likelihood when people are going, so all legal restrictions hopefully are coming to the end of the 22nd of June. And at that point, I expect to see those businesses which are looking for a return to be saying to people, actually, what we'd like is for people, in all likelihood, to everybody come back if possible. And then what we're going to do is see in a more organized way, bear in mind, going back to last March, what happened? We all sprayed off like snowflakes. It was in an entirely uncontrolled manner. What I expect to happen is people to say, look, come back in, let's actually regroup, get an idea of what happened. And now we're going to start actually controlling how home working works so that actually we all have a much better idea as to how flexible working will work in the future. And I think that's going to be an evolutionary process between June and December as people actually get a head around, right, these are the benefits, these are the disadvantages, let's get the best of both worlds. But we need to actually regroup to do that.
Perfect, thank you. So next we've got Helena White, Director of the HR Department.
Good morning, everybody. I totally agree with what Ian said. It's all going to be a fairly gradual process over the next 6, 7, 8 months or so, I think. Jasmine, if you can go to the first slide, please. So we're going to quickly talk about getting employees back to work, just some of the aspects, some of the things Rob's already talked about, and I know Chris is going to go into this in a bit more detail as well. I'm going to talk about hybrid working. So this other new catchphrase we've all had to get used to, a bit of working from home, a bit of working from the office, and we're going to talk about employee mental health and well-being as well. So on to the next slide, please, Jasmine. So getting employees back to work. Communication with employees is going to be the key thing. It's never going to work unless you communicate with your employees. So if you go on to the next slide, Jasmine, I'll go into this in a bit more detail. So Chris will touch on this later. Do you have an up-to-date COVID risk assessment for your workplace? It's vital protection for your business, but when it's communicated well, it can also help to reassure employees who might be feeling nervous about coming back to the workplace. Have your core business operations permanently changed because of the coronavirus? So Rob talked about this as well. If you've made major changes during the pandemic, you're going to need to revisit job roles and the distribution of work. You're going to need to consult staff on that if you're making any major changes. And who are you going to bring back to work and when? What we're recommending for some of our clients is a phased return might be easier to manage. So I completely agree with what Ian said, get people back to the office, let everything settle down, and then decide how you're going to manage home working or hybrid working. But if you can, a phased return would be easier to manage. That way you can run several return to work induction sessions for employees, you can make improvements, you can get people used to being back together in the office slowly over time. So one of my clients is starting off with bringing everybody back 1 day a week, then moving that up to 2 days a week. This is when they're allowed to from sort of the end of June onwards, then 3 days a week, then 4 days a week, then 5 days a week. And then they're going to look at how do we then bring in home working? And they might reduce back down from 5 days a week to 4 or 3 or something like that, but they're going to take it slowly. So we definitely return, sorry, Jasmine, back one slide. We're definitely recommending a return to work induction to bring your employees up to speed with any changes made to your business or processes while they've been working from home or off on furlough. So that might include new health and safety guidance or just how you're operating day to day in the post-lockdown workplace, because a lot of things are going to be different. You're going to have employees who need to be integrated back into teams. Some may have been furloughed, some haven't been furloughed, and you're going to have to get them back together again. Think about the dynamics that are involved there and how you can get team members back on the same page. There's a lot of businesses who've recruited employees during the last 13 months, and a number of people have never worked in the office. So you're going to have to think very carefully about how you get those new employees integrated into your company and the way you do things. So a return to work induction, definitely recommended. It's a good opportunity to lift everybody's spirits and focus on the positives. But just bear in mind, while some people might be very pleased to come back and see each other, see their colleagues, understandably, some others might also be feeling very apprehensive about the changed workplace. I've got a lot of clients who were expecting, when they started talking to employees about coming back to work, for those employees to be, coming back to work with a hop, skip, and a jump, and they've been quite taken aback when they've been, met with some resistance and anxiety from employees. So that's the importance of communicating with employees. Next slide, please, Jasmine. So what to expect when you are reopening? Some businesses obviously have reopened already, but the guidance currently is to remain working at home if you can do, and it won't be till the 22nd of June that perhaps a lot of office spaces can get back. So as Ian's already touched on, we're going to see an increase in flexible and remote working requests. Those who've been able to work from home may decide they want to continue, at least in part. So you've got to be prepared for flexible working requests and do get advice, as there's a very legal process to follow with flexible working requests. You can't just say yes or no and leave it at that. There's financial penalties for those employers who don't follow a correct process. And then transitioning back to the workplace, times have changed, and what's worked pre-pandemic may no longer have the same impact or the same effect. The days of giving your employees a stress ball and that was your mental health strategy, that's just not going to cut it anymore. So you're going to have to work very hard both with new employees and those who've been working from home. Rob's already talked about productivity. Just be prepared for a big cultural change, getting everybody back, and you are going to have to work hard to communicate to everybody. Next slide, please, Jasmine. Just an additional consideration for the return to work, especially here in the Southwest, and especially with those businesses that are linked to hospitality, leisure, tourism. It's going to be a really busy summer. And, you know, a lot of employees have been stuck at home and not able to go anywhere. And if their holiday hasn't been managed while they've been working from home or on furlough, a lot of employees have built up large leave balances, and they're very much looking forward to using that leave. Employers, on the other hand, are desperate to reopen their businesses, looking forward to a very busy few months, and they need all hands on deck. So as an employer, you're going to have to think about how you're going to manage holiday requests. If you haven't been managing leave balances up to date, you will have employees with large balances, and you're going to have to focus on how to do that. So do you have a holiday policy in place? How are you going to manage requests? Will it be first come, first served? And, you know, if you don't manage it fairly, it's going to be one of those things that could potentially lead to all sorts of issues. What you don't want to do is to be left with employees with a large leave balance at the end of the holiday year, and those employees will be expecting to be able to carry that leave forward. That's a liability for your business. So have a think about your holiday policy and your procedures, and feel free to give us a chat if you want to talk about that. If we see international travel restrictions lifted, you're going to get an influx of holiday requests. So just be sure that you've got a policy and you're going to be adequately staffed for your business. Next slide, please, Jasmine. So hybrid working, this new phrase about working a little bit in the office and a little bit from home. So we've already touched on, and Ian mentioned it earlier, tread carefully as an employer. You really don't want to commit to something that's going to be very difficult to back out of later. So that's why many companies are not committing to permanent plans about work patterns at this stage. We're finding that a quick survey is quite a useful way to help figure out where your employees are at the moment and identify any concerns. And that might help you to put some arrangements in place that might be subject to a trial period or you know, an ongoing review, for example. Rob mentioned that you know, looking at job design and figuring out what roles can be done where, when, and by whom is important. And I'll just echo that. And you may need to look at some training and support for your managers. So if they are managing teams that are doing working from home and working in the office, that those managers have got the skills to be able to manage a hybrid remote working team. Next slide, please, Jasmine. Ian's already touched on confidentiality and data protection, so I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail, except to say that, you know, as Ian mentioned, it's going to become a really big issue. We're seeing a lot of larger organisations include things such as well-being and remote working into their job titles. So they'll have a health and safety and well-being manager or a remote working manager. So I think we're going to be seeing more of that, especially for larger organisations. But even for small organisations, it is going to probably need to be part of somebody's role to focus on this, because it's going to be a way of life going forward. Have a think about how you run your business differently. So, for example, rather than just having meetings online or just having meetings face-to-face in person, have a think about having inclusive virtual meetings, which will have a mixture of people in the office and online. It takes a little bit of work to get it right, but it may be something that we'll have to do going forward. And, you know, just the international view can sometimes point to where things might be going in the UK. I mean, in Germany, for example, there's I think the legal right to work from home now, and so many employers are looking at ways to make this happen. The US initially was a little bit resistant in some places to remote working, but just all the challenges they've had to face mean that they've had to adopt remote working. And in places like Silicon Valley, for example, it's been completely successful. I think Silicon Valley is a bit like a ghost town at the moment. There's nobody there. So just have a look internationally and see what's happening. As Ian's mentioned, there's lots of pros and cons to having employees working remotely. If you're an organization who doesn't support flexible forms of working going forward, you are going to risk higher employee turnover, you're going to risk reduced employee engagement, and you're going to limit your ability to attract talent in the future. Some form of hybrid working, if you've planned it properly, will provide the opportunity to reduce estate and facility costs, enable employee well-being, and also support diversity and inclusion. Next slide, please, Jasmine. So in terms of well-being and mental health, I mean, this is a massive topic. I'm just going to be spending a couple of minutes on it. If you haven't already, it's going to be really important for you to look at some sort of mental health awareness training for the managers in your business. There's been an explosion of mental health issues. I think employers are beginning to see this. It started pre-pandemic, but the pandemic's just exacerbated it. And your managers need to have the skills to be able to pick up any issues and be able to refer people to more specialist help. It's going to be really important to have regular contact and one-to-ones with employees so you can start to pick up on this. And just a little word about domestic abuse. Crucially, home isn't a safe working space for everyone. We know that domestic abuse helplines reported a surge in calls over the lockdown, and employees who feel unsafe working from home should be permitted to attend a COVID secure workplace. Definitely something that we can help talk to you about if it's something you want to look at in more detail. And as Rob's touched on, the home working environment may not be conducive to productive working for everybody. You've got to recognise that the stress and the difficulties of home working, it doesn't suit everybody home working. So come up with some support measures to help the employees. Next slide, please, Jasmine. So in the workplace, it's important that your managers listen to people's concerns and do their best to reassure them. In the workplace, if you've got employees back in work at the moment, there are obviously rules on social distancing and mask wearing and everything else. Make sure that your business is sufficiently staffed and that your employees have break times, and you've got enough staff to avoid burnout, especially over the busy summer period coming up. A fear of catching coronavirus or passing on is still really prevalent for many people. So if there are staff who express worry about attending to the workplace, you've got to make sure you listen to their concerns and reassure them of all the precautionary steps that you've taken. If the problem persists, then do seek advice, as it can be a really complicated HR matter. Finally, before I come to finally, the pandemic's really impacted mental and physical health for a lot of employees. So as well as listening to your employees, you might want to look at some steps for wellbeing support, such as an employee assistance program. It's a really reliable and cost-effective solution that can help your team on the way to getting things back to normal. And finally, it's important to find time to have fun. You might not be able to arrange your usual company social activities, but finding some way of having a bit of fun is going to be an important part of bringing your team together and embedding your company culture. So that's me. Thank you, Jasmine. That's us. Get in touch if we can help with any of that.
That's great. Thank you very much. Lots of things to think about in there, and obviously details there as well. Just touching on the mental health, obviously before we went into the pandemic, there was sort of quite a lot of new thing coming out really with obviously mental health first aiders at work. Do you think that would be still a good thing to sort of bring about in your workplace, obviously even though with the hybrid working? And
I prefer to talk about mental health awareness rather than mental health first aiders. I think it's important for everybody, so managers and employees, to have an awareness of mental health. And you know, I wouldn't like to think that it's just one or two people who are sort of the designated mental health first aiders in a business. I'd prefer to say everybody should have an awareness. And there's some really good online courses out there that take, you know, 20, 30, 40 minutes. Employees can do them on their mobile phone or whatever device they've got, and they can stop and start the courses and, you know, fit it around their working day. But something like that is a very flexible and cost-effective way of making sure everybody understands the importance of mental health. And you know, you may want some people in your business to have a more in-depth understanding, but it is a complex area, and I think we've got to be careful that you don't have people in your business who you know, are thought to be the experts in mental health. It's, you know, it's really an area that professionals should be dealing with. But it's fine to have people who can signal employees to the right support and advice. But yeah, I'd focus on awareness for everybody rather than a handful of people.
Lovely, thank you very much. I'd like to introduce Simon Taylor from Plymouth University now, please.
Thank you. Yeah, Simon Taylor, an Employee Engagement and Placement Manager at the university. So I'm just going to be talking through placements, internships, and how companies and organisations can engage with the university. There's quite a range available now. Next slide, please. So common recruitment challenges. I'd like to normally touch upon this first. I used to work in recruitment for many years, and I've been at the university now for about 7 within the careers department. Now managing the team of placements and internships, having previously been a placement advisor. So I've got that kind of background, and I know only too well some of the typical challenges pre-COVID, and you know, after, no doubt would be similar, but slightly different, quite possibly. But down in the southwest, there's always been, from what I've heard, the sort of competing with larger companies and brand names is a bit of a challenge. Raising company profile to students at the university, lack of student awareness of what's down here, that can be a challenge. Cost of agency recruitment fees is, you know, they can be quite steep. There's also the time to train and recruit people and retain the talent. It's recruitment's obviously can be quite a challenge, and keeping people can be quite a challenge. So those are things that we're fully aware of. And I like to point out that as a university, we're fairly unique in that we've got about 65% of our student and graduate cohort that are from the southwest. So there's also a lot, therefore, that look to stay. And that's something that we're quite conscious of. Next slide, please. So via the careers service, and obviously the university is a big place, and there are a number of other sort of ways that employers and companies can engage, but just focusing from a kind of career service angle, we can help companies raise their profile to the student and graduate network. We often get asked around when's a good time to recruit, when's a good time to engage. Obviously, we're talking about this as to kind of going back to work, and certainly from what we're hearing is that there's been a hold off on recruitment, particularly with SMEs, and there might be, you know, with confidence growing, a bit of a bounce back over the summer. So anytime that you have a role, we can help with getting that advertised, and for free. So we've got a very good platform called My Career, which is part of, you might have heard of Target Connect. It's a national platform. It's known to students as My Career. So you can advertise an undergraduate or a graduate role entirely for free, have access to that, and we can help coordinate all of that. So it's a good service to be aware of. And we can also help link you to relevant schools and faculties at programme level, if that's the sort of thing that you'd be interested in. And I'll touch upon the other sort of projects and funding opportunities a bit later. Next slide, please. So just focusing on work placements first, probably do this in reverse. So just looking at some of the benefits really from both sides. So from a business point of view, a work placement, and just to touch upon that, that's your classic sandwich year in industry work placement. So 1 year being with a business or an organisation. But equally, the benefits are the same for shorter internships as well, really. So no long-term commitment. You know, you can have that student for that period of time. It's not fixed term sort of permanent headcount in that respect, but it can be, you know, possibly if you wanted it to be. Extra resource for busier times, obviously very good for companies to be a flexible model in that respect. You know, it might be through going back this summer that you don't necessarily need somebody all year, but for a month or a couple of months would be useful. And we certainly hear a lot by bringing students and grads in that it really can be a new perspective and fresh ideas, which is always welcomed. And from a kind of feeding a future talent stream, that's something that work placements are very good at, because we often get grad roles through and employers want the best grads. There's no better way to discover those at the undergrad level before they've even left. So that's why work placement is brilliant. When you've got someone for a year, you know very quickly whether they're going to be good. So it's a very good way of identifying talent early. And we work with a lot of organisations that have somebody for a placement, they do very well, and after even a couple of months, they sort of say, look, why don't you come back to us at a graduate level, employ them at part-time basis in their final year, and it really feeds that talent stream. So benefits to students, huge really. You know, it's all about the employability skills they have, and at the graduate level, it's those sort of skills on top of any experience that they may have. They certainly gain experience, confidence. There is that helping to make informed career choices as well. So lots and lots of benefits through gaining work experience, and work placements are a very good tool to do that. And there's the range there of the sort of subjects that we that have the opportunity to do a work placement. Sorry, yes, next slide, please. So we often get asked around sort of locally based placements, and I say placements and internships really, but is there sufficient demand from a student perspective? We often hear, you know, there's not much down here, and as we all know, there's actually a lot more down here than people realise. So we do a lot to raise that awareness to students. Next slide, please. So just to kind of give a bit of context, really, in recent cycles pre-COVID, computing subjects are always quite well engaged. So in the 1920 cycle, we had about 60 students on work placements, and 24 of those were in and around Plymouth. With mechanical engineering, 42 on placement, 8 based in Plymouth, but actually in the COVID hit cycle, 14 on placement, huge reduction, but 6 of those were Plymouth. Long story short, if we have something Plymouth or locally based, it gets filled. We just need the opportunities through. And electrical engineering, 15 on placement, 7 in Plymouth. So there is definitely demand from a student side. We often get asked about them. It's obviously very good for the students to have something locally based, because they're either locally based originally, or they're living in a house of 5 or 6 and they could all do a placement in and around Plymouth, and that'd be the ideal situation. And there's a sort of list of some of the organisations we work with locally, but also some of the sort of other national and international names that we do as well. Next slide, please. So internships wise, so I've talked about work placement. So a placement really, as we view it, is something that's around a year in duration. It's an integrated part of their programme, but still optional. An internship is something that is basically shorter. So micro internships, I just wanted to highlight. We've been doing these for about a year, and they've proven very popular with students. These have all been virtual, lasting up to 2 weeks. They are voluntary. We've got 3 cycles throughout the year, and the focus of these is for students to be working on some sort of defined project and to gain work experience at the same time. We've just completed the Easter cycle. We had about 40 students that completed that cycle, and that went up from our pilot being around 20, and then we got up to 30, 40 for Easter. We're hoping sort of 50 plus for the summer. And there's a range of the kind of examples of what students have been getting involved with, and it's amazing how much they can actually achieve over a couple of weeks. It was very much a sort of give this thing a go, new model. But students enjoy it. Our hosts, our employers have really engaged well with it. And like I say, it's actually amazing what somebody can do in a short period of time. Appreciate you won't have met them. It will all be virtual as well. And our summer cycle is June the 28th to August the 13th. And the sort of deadline for kind of opportunities through, because there's quite a lot to coordinate before they start, is the 19th of May. So roughly in a month's time, we'd need those opportunities through. So if that was of interest to anybody, that would be super, because we're trying to get as many opportunities for the summer cycle. We've got quite a campaign about it at the moment. So those are micro internships. Next slide, please. And just to sort of highlight other ways, I mean, there are other types of internships. There's, I'll probably reverse order, but summer internships, the micros are up to 2 weeks. A summer, you could have anybody from 1 month to 3 months in duration. So if it's actually that you're needing someone for a longer period of time, and that you can employ them for that period of time, that can certainly be coordinated and advertised via the careers service too. Just wanted to mention, this is quite new for us. The Santander Employability Scheme is also an internship offer. We work closely with Santander, and there's a pot of funding available where the students can be paid a one-off bursary at the end of the experience. So there's no cost from an employer's perspective, and the student again would be assisting with some sort of small project and associated tasks and gain some work experience. That's just gone live. It's only actually available up until July, because we weren't sure whether we were going to get funding in this cycle, and we suddenly did quite late. So we put this all together, and there's the link there to the Santander webpage if you're interested. Next slide, please. And I don't mean to bombard everybody, and I won't go into too much detail, but what I've mentioned so far is everything that we do from the careers service. So placements, internships. There are other projects around the university that we work with, but they're standalone and they're outside of careers. And these are your sort of ERDF funded or Office for Student funded projects, which will all typically have a lifespan of 2 years to 3 years. So just to highlight those that are live currently, where there might be there is some funding available as well. We've got a one called Access Through Innovation, ATI2 in Cornwall. I'm sure you'll be aware of some of these already. That's a Cornish SME focused internship offer with 50% funding. You've got the webpage there. EPIC2, also Cornish SMEs focused, undergrad or grad, all around health technology, and that's 50% funding available. Low Carbon Devon's quite a new one. So in the title, Devon SMEs, undergrad or grad. Again, these are all SME focused, and all around low carbon and sustainability. So 75% funding for that one. And Mayflower as well. They've got some funded internships available via the business school. So those are separate to careers. We work closely with them, and it's a case of making use of the funding whilst it's available. Next slide, please. I think that's pretty much everything really. I just wanted to highlight the slides to show the platform that we use, My Career. So any of what I've mentioned would be advertised via the My Career platform. The students have an app for it, so they get all the alerts, and it's a fantastic platform. And again, you can have access to that entirely for free. That's it really. I appreciate there's quite a lot thrown at you, but long story short, there are a number of ways that organisations can engage with students from a placement and an internship angle. It's quite a flexible model. It works for a lot of students and certainly a lot of employers. And if anyone had any queries outside of today, more than happy for you to contact me directly. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Simon. We actually had an internship at the Devon Chamber as well, so we really appreciated it. That was just pre-pandemic, but she really did bring a fresh pair of eyes to a project that we were doing, and we're still in contact with her now. So she did a great job. So we really enjoyed that. Also, as well, it'd be quite good to shout about that really in the newsletter as well. Just obviously put it out to all the members as well, just to make them aware of that. So I can. Or if you just send it through, obviously, to us, then we can send that out for you. No problem.
Thank you very much. Everything I've mentioned today, the links are there. I didn't quite have the time to go into the mentoring either, but the link to the mentoring schemes that we run are available there as well.
Lovely, thank you. So last speaker, last but not least, we've got Chris from Womble Dickinson.
Hi all. Thanks very much for the introduction. We can click onto the first proper slide, I guess. What I'm going to talk to you about today is primarily the health and safety duties that your company will have in relation to workers who are returning to work from the office, and also your duties in relation to those workers who continue to work from home as well. And one of the things that I typically start with when I talk to any client about this is that guidance is guidance only, and a failure to follow the guidance is itself not a breach of the law. There is a very distinct difference. The approach that employers need to take is to review government and HSE guidance, take that into account in meeting existing obligations under previous and existing regulation and legislation, such as the Health and Safety at Work Act and the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999. In other words, employers must take account of and give appropriate weight to the relevant guidance, but that guidance is not in itself determinative of the extent of an employer's obligations. In short, employers must continue, in addition to the guidance, to ensure health, safety and welfare at work of its employees so far as reasonably practicable. Now, one theme that you're going to hear me repeat throughout this section is about risk assessments, and I hope you don't get bored of me saying that, because they are really vitally important. Because what is reasonably practicable under the legislation is determined by a risk assessment process, and I'm sure all of you and your companies will already have undertaken a risk assessment. But one of the key aspects is that you need to continue to evaluate and update those risk assessments whenever necessary. So we can click on to the next slide. Now, I've mentioned there that failure to follow the guidance is not a breach of the law necessarily, but it is still vitally important because it helps to form how you can comply with the law. Now, the headline message is essentially that you and your staff should continue to work from home where you can. But if you cannot work from home, then you should continue or start to travel into your normal workplace. You don't need to be classified as a critical worker to go to work if you can't work from home. And before you start to make your working arrangements more permanent, employers and employees should discuss working arrangements, and employers in particular should take every possible step to facilitate their employees working from home, including the provision of suitable IT equipment to enable remote working. Now, some of this might appear old hat, and you might say that the boat has well and truly sailed on much of this, but there's still key considerations, particularly for those workers who are continuing to work from home on a more permanent basis. Where people can't work from home, employers should take steps to make workplaces more COVID secure, and I'm sure you've already done that. Some of the steps that you can take, again, have been around since the start of the pandemic, really. But where employees are starting to return to your workplaces, there are additional measures that you can take, again, which should be based on a risk assessment analysis. But things like helping your employees to avoid busy times and routes on public transport. If you've got a condensed work area and lots of people arriving and leaving at similar times, then perhaps stagger work times to allow them to do so in a safer way. And extra consideration should also be given to anyone who is at higher risk of the effects of COVID. Next slide, please. Now, the good news is, if you view it in that way, that the government, via its departments for business, energy and industrial strategy, and Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, have produced 14 individual guides for a range of different types of work in different industries. What I'm going to do, you'll see that on the slide, the bottom point of the slide says Google working safely during COVID. That was because I wasn't sure people would have enough time to write down the full link. So I'm going to post it into the chat, which it's just been, which I've just done. But essentially, I've tested this, so I hope it works for everyone. If you Google working safely during COVID, it is typically the first result that pops up, and it's a government website, so you'll it's official. So the key message, which again I'll apologise for in advance, is across all of the industry sectors and all types of work, the physical measures to apply and to adopt by employers will be based on a suitable risk assessment. But there are some example measures that I can take you through. So we can go on to the next slide, please. Now, typical measures, I'm sure you are, and you'll be, used to hearing some of these anyway. Increase how often you clean surfaces, especially those that are being touched a lot, like desk areas and canteen surfaces. Ask your staff and any visitors to use hand sanitizer. Make sure you've got hand sanitizing stations, as in efficient places around the office, and obviously to wash hands frequently as well. Remind any visitors to site to wear face masks where they are required to do so by law, and that includes in the office. Try to maintain social distancing as much as possible. There are steps you can take to make it easier for everyone to do that by introducing things like a one-way system that your staff and your visitors can follow. If your office or site can be rearranged in terms of the furniture to keep staff socially distanced, then consider that as an option. And equally, does the office or workplace canteen or the space around the kettle become crowded at various points during the day? Is there a second area that can be set up safely? Can you do things like, as oppressive as this might sound, is set up times for various teams to go get their cups of tea, something along those lines. It might sound an obvious one considering we're on a Zoom chat, but reduce face-to-face meetings where possible. The other one is to ensure adequate ventilation in spaces. This means supplying fresh air to enclosed spaces where people are present, and you can do that either through natural ventilation through windows or mechanical ventilation, such as fans and things like that. One of the key things is to maintain records of all staff and visitors to site for a minimum of 21 days. And as harsh as it may sound, you should be prepared to turn people away, particularly if they are showing any COVID-related symptoms. And we all know, if I call them the popular ones, which are persistent cough, high temperature, lost sense of taste or smell. If anyone says that they have experienced these kind of symptoms, then they should be self-isolating. And any employer, it's a big no-no to require someone who feels like they need to be self-isolating to come to work, and any employee who does so is committing an offence in that way. Anna's already touched on consideration of mental health and well-being. That's also a further key consideration for staff, both returning to work who might feel slightly apprehensive about that or anxious, and for those staff who continue to work from home with a lack of that face-to-face support. In line with that point, constant communication really from employers to employees is absolutely vital, whether they're working from from the workplace or at home. Moving on to the next slide, or we are still working from home. The essential point to make here is that employers have the same health and safety responsibilities for home workers as they do for those workers who are working from office spaces or other workspaces. The Health and Safety at Work Act provides that employers have a general duty to protect health, safety and welfare of their employees, including those who work from home. And again, it's that so far as reasonably practicable point. And again, what does this mean? Risk assessments. I'm sorry to say it again, but I told you I would, and I give you a pre-warning. As part of the consideration of risk assessments, you should consider the key questions of how will you keep in touch with your employees? What work activity will they be doing and for how long? Can it be done safely? And do you need to put control measures in place to protect those home workers? The assessments that you undertake should also include, for example, things like ventilation, temperature, lighting, floor space, including the potential for slips and trips, chair, desk, and workstation assessments, and any other equipment they might need to make sure that their tasks are being done efficiently. It's important for all employers to maintain a record of those risk assessments and update it as you go where relevant. Where hazards are identified, it's for employers to determine, as part of the risk assessment that that's carried out, what reasonably practicable measures can and should be put in place to address those risks. In some circumstances, this may include the provision of additional equipment such as a desk or an ergonomic chair, and employers have a further responsibility for any equipment they do provide, including that they must ensure that it is suitable and safe to use and that its condition is maintained. Any issues identified with the home itself as part of the risk assessment should ideally be rectified by the employee before home working commences. Now, again, I'll go back to the ship is well and truly sailed for most employees working from home, but where issues cannot be rectified, then it might be the case that home working is not a viable option for that particular employee. And again, it's for employers to assess where the greater risk lies, either from working at home or from coming into the office with a potential exposure to COVID-19, and depending on measures can be put in place in the designated workspace. Again, just in case the message hasn't come through yet, the risk assessment that's undertaken should be kept under regular review, and particularly reviewed if any concerns or issues are raised by either by the employee, or if there is a change in any of their circumstances, such as if the employee is beginning to suffer from aches, pains, or some kind of discomfort related to their workstation arrangements. And employees should be encouraged to report and discuss any material change to their circumstances to their relevant line managers, particularly where they have concerns regarding their home working arrangements. And employees should look to take corrective action as soon as reasonably practicable. Next slide. This is the last one from me, and I guess what I wanted to touch on here was that the health and safety executives' approach to the risks from display screen equipment use at home is that they feel there's a limited risk or limited increased risk, should I say, when working from home temporarily. Now, temporarily means for a time limited period. And so, for instance, working from home for 1 day a week, but in perpetuity, is not likely to be considered as temporarily working from home. At the start of the pandemic, when swathes of employees began working from home in large number, it placed a huge strain on companies in terms of arranging equipment and fundamentally ensuring that home risk assessments were carried out. As a result, what might have been considered as a reasonably practicable measure at the time to implement may have been affected, and there may have been some additional leeway provided to employers. But as time has passed, most people have been working home for more than a year now. Employers will be expected to catch up with any backlog caused by that initial period of intensity. And certainly as we move away from the government's work at home if you can message, and people start to work at home, just as a matter of course, permanently, then what might be considered as reasonably practicable or a reasonably practical measure may change, and employers should take the view that, and you've probably guessed it by now, that risk assessments should be undertaken and regularly reviewed and updated with logs kept, of course. And the additional one, just relating to mental health, is the key message is to keep in touch and ensure that you are conversing with those people who are working from home so they don't feel isolated, and act on any concerns that they have.
Lovely, thank you, Chris. And finished literally just on time. So unfortunately, we haven't got any time for questions. However, I haven't had any come through in the chat anyway. So if there is anybody that does want to ask any questions, then obviously just get in touch with the team and we can obviously forward them on to the right person for you. So that's no problem. I hope you've all enjoyed the event today. It's been great hearing from all of our guest speakers. Thank you ever so much for taking the time today to come and speak to us all and share obviously those little nuggets that we're going to obviously need moving forward as we're coming out of the pandemic, and hopefully we'll be able to meet up soon face to face. I look forward to that. Have a good day, everyone.